Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm Adrian Sanders, the CEO and co-founder of Chargehound. This is the Payment Innovators Fireside Chat series. I'm here today with Archie Puri, the Chief Product Officer at Galileo. Archie is, I think, one of the best product people I've ever met in payments. She has seen a lot in the payments world, knows probably more than I will ever know about how payments works and products get innovated. And so I'm super excited to sort of chat with her about what she's up to at Galileo, specifically around the innovation on the issuing side of things in the payments world, which I feel like doesn't get as much love and attention as it probably should, especially nowadays. And also just talking about the evolution of tech in payments, and particularly the rise of what is known as, intelligent e-commerce or intelligent commerce, what that means, what it doesn't mean, stuff like that. So welcome, Archie. Really excited to kick this chat off with you.
Adrian, thank you so much for inviting me. I've been following the Payments Innovators chat very closely and have been thrilled to hear some of the speakers. So I was deeply honored when you asked me to join and come here today to share some thoughts. So I'm very excited about our conversation. But firstly, congratulations to you and the Chargehound team on the acquisition by PayPal. So job well done.
Thank you. Thank you so
very,
much.
very well deserved. Awesome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been quite a journey, and definitely excited about what we're going to be doing at PayPal. More on that to come as we figure all that out and get integrated with them and learn what it's like to work in a much larger company. So thank you. I know you spent a long time there, so I'll definitely be chatting you up for tips on what to do and how to be inside of a big org like PayPal. So.
Yeah, I think the Chargehound team, especially our association, goes way back, and even as part of PayPal and Braintree, we've loved engaging with the team. So it's really exciting to see this happen.
Yeah, no, and for those of you that don't know, Chargehound works pretty extensively with PayPal. We were a strategic partner for them. PayPal Ventures invested in us. But a big part of that, crucially, was sort of our relationship with PayPal's processor product, Braintree. Archie and the team there at Braintree really helped us grow and understand how to work with large payment processors and think about our product in relationship to that and how we could drive value for the merchants. So definitely integral to our success. So happy that it's sort of come to this conclusion. But yeah, I want to talk and sort of jump more into what you're up to now at Galileo, and talk to me a little bit more about what is going on in the innovative world of issuing. Again, something that people don't often, in my space, say, oh, issuing is where all the cool things are. But I'd love to hear from you about what is exciting about issuing that you've sort of seen or are working on or thinking about.
Yeah, I think so. So for context, for everyone who's listening here, I spent the last 8 years on the acquiring side, and most recently in Jan joined Galileo as the Chief Product Officer. And Aiden, for me, my goal is to learn the full circle of payments for every payments transaction, going all the way from the merchant to the issuing bank and the consumer. And I'm hoping in a few years, with the issuing side knowledge, I'll be really dangerous on both acquiring and issuing. I think issuing, for the little time that I've spent there, has been very interesting and exciting for me, because there are a number of things that are changing. And while I was heads down at Braintree and PayPal, and in the last 5 years, when I look at what's changed, there has been so much innovation in fintech, and it comes down to a few things. A lot of it is about traditional systems and how they have operated, and changing that to work in favor of consumers and make sure the consumers get the access to financial services that they need, because our traditional systems have always been stacked up against us to a certain extent. So for me, what has been exciting is how different fintech companies, neobanks and challenger banks are rethinking this space. And as we continue to see more changes come in, some of the ones that I'm excited about is, as you continue that consumer journey, how do you get consumers access to the right financial services? How do you get them access to the right financial services at the right point, at the point of need, as opposed to them planning ahead or planning afterwards? Because neither of those always work in perfection. And so whether it is even things like getting access to early pay or getting access to the right credit product or the right lending product or ways in which you can actually combine different tenders. And I think that is what has been most interesting. I think coming up, we will see a lot more innovation on how money moves and how we can increase both on the speed of money as well as the exchange of value and efficiency of the whole system. And in my great conspiracy theory, I think all networks will merge, but more on that to come.
Those are some amazing points. I've heard it referred to, you said the speed of money. I've heard of it also as like sort of the velocity of money, which I think is basically kind of the same idea.
Yeah.
And I think this idea about getting consumers the things that they want at the time that they want it is just in every interaction that I have in the payments space as a consumer. Now that I'm in the payments world, I'm really confronted with that. So, I mean, a good example of this was like, I was helping a friend, apply for a credit card, and he was just like choosing options. And the time it took to get a credit card to like get approved and go through the process on product X versus product Y. One is like, thanks for your application, we'll get back to you in like, five business days. And the other one is like, yeah, you've been approved, right? And so one thing is obviously just like that speed, there's that gratification. But I think the other thing is just which of these entities are you going to trust now as a consumer that expects a certain speed of your financial institution to be tech savvy and in your culture of like, things you want to do in your day to day. It's like, well, you're definitely going to trust the one that like knows how to automatically do background checks or ping your last four of your SSN to, get enough financial data to make that decision, right? Versus the one that has to run it through a fax machine. So those things I think really resonate with me.
Especially in a pandemic world, and as we've been coping with all of the changes and having to go digital really quickly, that becomes even more important. For me, very recently, so I have a 13-year-old, and we're trying to teach her fiscal responsibility. Right now, I'm
noble exercise.
Very noble goals in life of a parent, but some of the bank partners that we worked with were like literally we were driving for a road trip and entering information on our phone to be like, hey, we need a child account. What does it take to get enabled with it, and how do you get your card quickly? And one of the experiences that we went on to choosing then actually enabled the entire process for us in about 10 minutes, right? From opening it up on your phone, filling up the information, to actually getting a virtual card that we could use at the next Starbucks. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, and I think about that too with the wallet checkout for small businesses, whether it's PayPal wallet or Apple Pay, that I'm just frustrated if I have to put in my credit card details now from my phone. And so, you just have these, like, I can't go back, right? And so I think that these sorts of things, I think you're totally right that you start from the consumer perspective. Okay, well, what does it take to get us there to meet that consumer perspective? So let me ask you this then, as Galileo sort of, been in the space for a while, what is it that you guys think about in terms of staying ahead of the curve on this sort of topic of payment innovation and trying to keep up with consumer demands?
Yeah, I think so. For context, for all of the listeners dialed in, Galileo is a platform that fintech is built on. It's the ABI standard that any business or any fintech that wants to get its financial services product off the ground can use to enable these capabilities. And so, Adrian, for us, a big part, the core mission that drives us is how can we make financial services accessible? How can we democratize that access? And so when we think about the problems that we should be solving, it is about how do we enable other businesses and other entrepreneurs and innovators to create these new products as a platform, we always have to put complexity front and center, and our role there is singular. Our role as a platform is to absorb that complexity, to keep raising our own bar on the number of things that we can solve for business, so that for them to go through that journey, like as a consumer, the joy that I got in going through that journey from wanting an account for my daughter to getting it, like my goal and that of Galileo is how can we get that same level of delight for businesses who are trying to solve this problem.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting point. That makes a lot of sense. So on that, this sort of concept of taking the complexities of the payments world and dutifully and accurately creating abstraction to make it simpler. And I know you've talked about this a lot, democratizing access to these fintech and to these tooling. What does that look like today? What does it look like tomorrow? What does it look like in the future? Specifically for you guys at Galileo, what are things that you feel like really needs to happen, or that you guys are really pushing on to happen?
Yeah, I think for me, there are essentially two key ideas that we are playing around with. And across the board, like Galileo has had immense growth in the course of a number of years. And even in last year, we've closed in like record number of clients. And as we think about our scale and where we have succeeded and what we power today, the two big ideas for us are, one is, when we think about access, we have historically thought about access from a consumer financial services standpoint. But if you take a step back from technology and innovation and fintech, and you think about from a layperson point of view, consumer is the same, right? Like I'm the same person, whether I
Yeah,
am buying something as a consumer, whether I am starting a small business, or whether I am getting a salaried job or employed somewhere, it is the same person. And ultimately, what we want to be able to do is follow that path of that consumer and tackle it in two ways, right? Tackle it on one hand, we are following that path. On the other, we are growing our platform to be able to cater to all the needs of businesses who might be touching the life of this consumer in all of the different roles that the consumer has.
right.
And so for me, that is what is most exciting. And the second one is, as we tend to do that, a big thing for consumers, natural, right? If I take from my experiences, I have a number of different payment methods, number of different ways of transacting. Like, how can we make it such that for a consumer, some of these interactions at checkout or in our day-to-day things where we have to spend money or exchange value just happen naturally through the merging of these payment methods? Like, what would that look like if we had to explore? And a lot of this is just long range thinking that we are trying to contemplate and figure out how we could play in that space.
Yeah, I love this idea that regardless of whether you are a consumer or an enterprise or a business, it's just people trying to log onto a website and do something, and or all through their phone. And we think about that a lot at Chargehound, that like we're not just selling this product to a business. It's a group of people, and they have objectives and have things that they're concerned about, or goals that they have. And solution selling, I'm a big believer in, but it's really more about just being empathetic to the fact that they're just other human beings trying to do stuff. And I think that payments products, sometimes when you run into them, they were clearly not designed for people, right? But this idea that if you start with this philosophy that it doesn't really matter whether I'm Adrian, a business owner, or Adrian, a father or whatever, it's just like, just make it easy for me to do what I'm trying to do, right? And make it make sense. So it's such a simple goal, but can be really challenging, right? From a
Yeah,
design perspective.
almost like optimize for me. I want I want a financial institution that optimizes for me, that puts
Yeah.
me front and center of everything that they stand for.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful perspective. And if you operate from that philosophy, like how many challenges kind of go away, right? Or how many things now that were problems sort of change, right? And are opportunities. I think that that's something that we've talked about, and I've been learning about issuing, right? Is like, the payments world, I think particularly merchants, right? Issuers are not always like your best friend, right? In the sort of day-to-day engagement. But, if you shift that and you're like, well, no, there's a way that there's a really highly collaborative interaction here. And then obviously for issuing now, especially with, PayFacs and merchants that are also sort of issuing debit cards or, sort of all these different things, it's like, you shifted this mentality from, oh, well, there needs to be friction here, or we don't care if certain people have this sort of interaction, to no, if we collaborate together, all of this additive value is generated, right? So, okay, well, on this sort of, as things change, and things have been changing sort of rapidly in the pandemic, and certainly I feel like has just rapidly accelerated where we're going from a fintech perspective and consumer behavior, et cetera. I would love to hear from you about what are some, from a product development perspective, what are some things that you feel like every, fintech product needs to have, whether it's consumer or B2B, just sort of like top 3 things that have come to your mind.
I think for me, and I think you said this very well earlier in our conversation, I don't think we can turn the wheel back. We are
The
now
floodgates are open.
where
Yeah.
everything needs to be digital. So when people are thinking about new fintech products or new fintech companies or financial services products, certain things which I think should always be top of mind is, number one is being mobile first and digital, right? I don't think that going back to a place where you are only operating out of a non-digital world is going to work. There were a record number of branches that were closed in US alone in the course of 2020. And that is because people cannot go to stores, and
Yeah.
things in our world are getting busier, and we straddle across multiple roles. So being digital and being mobile first is number one. I think second is figuring out where you draw the line between technology problems that you're going to own and build versus things that you're going to look for a good partner to build. And on the surface, a lot of different platforms and partners that you work with may seem the same. But I think what you need to figure out very quickly is which one is going to help you pivot and change for the better and change fast, because none of us knew that the pandemic would take the shape that it did, and a lot
Sure.
of businesses had to innovate overnight. Now, if they're then on platforms that take a long time to enable these capabilities for them, then it can mean, especially for small businesses, it can mean like the end of the business. So for me,
Yeah.
it's being mobile first and making sure that you have a clean, as a product team, you have a very clean delineation between what problems you're going to build in house, what technology you're going to build versus what you're going to rely on a partner, and how do you evaluate that partner. I think for me those are like the two key things. Then the third one, of course, is knowing very clearly who are you serving, if it's a consumer or if it's a business, but ultimately, what is it that they need? What are their pain points? Oftentimes, our viewpoints of the products we want to build are influenced by information that we find through networks or through the industry and things how people have done. But getting out there and actually meeting your
Talking
consumers
to your
where they are.
users. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I remember, and so I'm a big follower of Mind the Product conference. And a while back, there was a speaker on Mind the Product who was like, look at a mall. That is where your average consumer is for any different. You want a consumer set, like walk into a mall and stand in front of the store that speaks to your consumer audience. And that should be a survey group. And getting very scrappy about identifying how do you go identify these consumers, where will you meet them, and how scrappily can you gather that information, to me then become like 3 things that everybody should focus on.
I think those are great points. I think on mobile, we obviously talked about just how obvious that one is now. On this build versus buy one, we actually, we had a chat with Logan Vanderlinden about this, that's always like this conundrum for a merchant of like, what should they build in-house and what should they buy? And as you know, for us at Chargehound, we get merchants all the time saying, well, we're going to just build this in-house. And we say, okay, like, we'll chat in a year, right? Because there's no way it's your core competency. It doesn't make sense to take your engineers, and unless chargebacks are such a big problem for you that you have to, in which case you have other problems. But I think this idea of not trying to boil the ocean, right? That you really need to be excellent at what you're excellent at. And then you need to find people that you trust that are in your partner network that you get their core competency. And I think, again, we at Chargehound, it's such a small sliver of the payment space, but we've gotten really good at it because it's the one thing that we've been doing. And so people trust us when new things come out, there's new guidance, the pandemic, right? All sort of these things. And it's just the time that you save not having to learn all that stuff, right? Because you're too busy having to learn more important things for your business. And then the last thing, this sort of point around talk to users, like, Chargehound went through the Silicon Valley Incubator Y Combinator, and that's like the number one thing when we were doing that the mentors hammer into your head over and over. They're like, how do you know that people want this? How do you know that this thing is working? It's like, give it to people and see what they do with it. And 9 times out of 10, you're totally wrong, right? You're like, oh, well, this is how people will use my product, or this is why people value my product. And until you put it in their hands, you actually have no idea, no matter how smart you are, right? I think those are great points.
Yeah, your point about partners, right? Like, and people that you partner with, there is also a point in time answer. People sometimes think that build versus buy is like just an answer
forever. Yeah.
Not a forever answer. Your answer will change as you go through the life cycle. You may start with like licensing or partnering with someone. You may reach a scale and a tipping point where it might
where you need to build
for you to build. But then you can also reach a point where you might realize it's just not worth the effort to spend on this. But then you want a partner whose incentives are aligned to yours, right? Like, typically when partnerships become ineffective is when you feel like your partners are not serving you well in terms of incentives.
Yeah.
And I think it is a cycle.
Yeah. That makes total sense to me. I feel like, especially in B2B and in payments, alignment, as soon as things are not aligned, it's very clear and problems come up immediately. But when things are aligned and there are challenges, it's very easy to get to consensus, because you just have a meeting where you say, okay, well, we agree these are the things that we want to do together. And if the answer is yes, okay, well, let's figure this out together. So I agree 100% with that. Talk to me a little bit about, since I think fintech and in payments, things are just being pushed to breakneck speed around innovation, just the expectation. What are things that that we should be using, whether it's knowledge or tools or tech or skills that just sort of try and keep pace with that, or to help from a product development perspective? Are there things that you rely on, or things that ways of thinking or frameworks that are particularly helpful?
I think that there are actually many frameworks, as is with everything we do. There is a proliferation of many. I think for all product teams, the important things come down to the following. One is, what are you really good at, and what is your mission? What are you here to solve? And like I said, for a platform, it's about, hey, we are here to absorb complexity. We're here to absorb complexity for everyone who uses our platform. And our goal is to lower the barrier for entry for them, make it super easy, super clean. So then from there, you go to what then becomes your table stakes, things that you have to absolutely be good at, that are non-negotiable, that you will always prioritize first. And then the second and third order of things would be, where are your customers going? What are their needs? So what are new things that you want to be ahead of in solving? And then the third becomes what I would say experimentation, and you try things out. You can't do a lot of that. You have to spend some portion of your capacity experimenting and trying things, because you don't know what trend you might hit up or what data you might find that you might want to go and double down on. And so different product teams have different models that they use. There are a lot of prioritization frameworks. For me, the simplest ones have been the ones that actually allow me to prioritize between table stakes, between things that I have to do to help my customers grow and things that I want to see how we could continue leading on the industry.
Cool. Those are great answers. The last thing on sort of this product development stuff, and then I want to get to my next topic. You've been building and designing products in payments for a while now. You have many years experience doing that. If you could go back in time, what do you wish that you had or knew back when you were starting out? Like, what are some things that you wish you had sort of considered or sort of dove deeper in if you could?
Yeah, I think for me, and I think I've just been fortunate in the opportunities I've had at places I've been able to work at. And I've consistently worked on like the B2B side and different forms of platforms. Um, what I realized was the obvious customer who you're building for is often not the customer that you should be building for.
Hmm.
Right. And I think for me, that realization came from my early days in Braintree, joining that and trying to actually um, immerse myself in the culture and the people and realizing what drove us was it was not merchants that we were solving this for. It was not our partner banks that we were solving this for. We were actually solving it to make sure that people had easy ways to pay, that the experience for people was easy. And so I think like that advice for me was really great because that holds true with everything we do now.
Yeah.
It's sometimes your obvious customer is not the customer. And while it is great to plan your roadmaps around what your immediate clients need, you also need to keep a finger on the pulse of who are they serving and what do they need, because ultimately those are the people. If you can drive their adoption for the products of your clients can then drive adoption for what you build. And that 2 degrees of removal and 2 degrees of separation between your own products and tools and who you build for is was almost like an interesting learning for me. I hadn't ever thought about it that way.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. I feel like this sometimes we get so lost in the weeds of solving for some idiosyncratic request or a feature, and we're like, wait, does this actually help the merchant, make more money? Does it, and it's like, well, how does the merchant make more money? It's like, well, when people buy more stuff, and it's like successfully, right? And it's like, okay, well, if we just solve that problem, then do all these problems go away? And it's like, yes, right. So I think that's a terrific answer. Um, okay, I want to move on to this topic here, which I think is a great one: the rise of intelligent commerce. So,
Ooh, like a favorite subject.
intelligent commerce, payments orchestration, big data, AI, ML, all this stuff. That's I think now more than ever. Again, not to harp on it, but post pandemic, everybody is talking about, well, everything's moving so fast, everything's got to get more intelligent. Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on intelligent commerce and what you think about it.
I think that and for me, it's there is value, right? Like if you look at what intelligent commerce ultimately does and means is how do you optimize, and if it is in the context of e-commerce, it's how do you optimize for the payment? How do you optimize for this likelihood of this payment going through? Because that's what you're trying to maximize. That's what
Which
you're
is a
trying.
good goal. It makes
That's a
sense.
good goal.
Yeah.
It's like I have an engaged customer. How am I
Yeah.
going to make sure that they are able to pay for what I'm selling to them? And with a lot of improvements in infrastructure and cloud capabilities and others, access to data has become much more easier and managing data at scale. And so that is what sort of led to the advent of intelligent commerce. Like if everyone was trying to individually look at analytics, can we come up with the answers of what is causing the payment to fail? And then when you add data to the mix and ML and AI to the mix, you actually now are able to analyze at scale. So there is definitely value to it. And as you start as a merchant, when you start thinking about these problems, you then realize that you're working with multiple payment providers and you need something that helps you optimize across all of them. But here is where I think the irony of it is a little bit, right? Because while wanting to optimize across all of your different payment processors and payment providers starts out as a good goal. The moment any one of these players that's actually doing great payment orchestration starts getting absorbed into one of the key players, then that is where it stops being
It's
a
no
player
longer payments
agnostic side.
orchestration. Yeah.
Yeah, it's no longer orchestration. You're just optimizing for a single one. So I think that is always, so you will always see, I think that it happens in waves. You will see players come in. A lot of them will start with payments orchestration, then they'll get specialized, and then the cycle continues and new players come in. So identifying as a merchant, identifying what helps you drive that orchestration, and are there tools that you could be bringing in-house to help you manage that is an important factor. But then some of this data can only get you so far. I think intelligent commerce is great when it is in the context of commerce, but beyond a point, it's how can I optimize for a payment that I know will go through on this payment method, but not about how do I enable, make it possible for this customer to buy something. What the question that intelligent commerce answers is how can I make it possible for the customer to pay for what they're buying? But it does not actually address how can I make it possible for the customer to buy. And that
Right.
is where I think that, and with some of my newfound appreciation for issuing, I think where the limits of intelligent commerce come in is that limit of the data sharing that happens across the issuing and acquiring side.
Yeah.
Um, Earlier, it was not possible, right? Like acquiring was going through its own range of innovation. Innovation hadn't picked up on the issuing side. Acquiring has become more open and issuing is getting there. But at some point, getting both of those sides together is going to be important.
I think that's a great point, that basically this idea of optimization at the sort of what, like, payments is a journey, right? Like it's a literal journey of where these digits go and then who has to touch them to decide that this is okay. All that stuff changes many hands. And so, we can optimize one end of that journey as much as we want, which is like, what method of transport do you take to get to the airport? But if the airplane always moves at the same speed and that's 90% of the travel time, there's diminishing returns to continually optimizing, on the other sides of that journey. And so I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think what's exciting is this idea that new challenger banks and neobanks
Yep.
and issuers are coming and saying, let's provide these tools to get more collaborative. And there's pressure now on acquirers to keep up. And it's coming from everybody, right? Which I think is super healthy. So I agree. If you sort of increase the optimization on the issuing and acquiring side by 5%, that's probably a lot better than 20% more on what we've already had on that sort of consumer transaction perspective, at point of sale potentially. So that's a great point. Okay, we're running up a little bit on time, and I want to get to some questions that have come in. So here's a question that just came in now. What do you think about compliance on money service businesses and data availability if you want to access the EU market? I don't know how much you know about that or want to speak to that.
I am by no means an expert on compliance or the EU market, but I think fundamentally, um, a lot of, and this goes back to how you build a platform and what is your platform meant to do. I think there are some fundamental things that you have to have in your platform ground up. And for me, some of those are a deep understanding of local regulation and compliance needs, and how do you make sure that when you're building your platform or extending your platform, you're taking that into consideration from get-go. Adding anything after a fact, especially when it comes to being built right in the first place, I think is hard. So for me, that is number one. The second is your use of data. With especially talking about our previous conversation, the previous question, there is so much value in data, and there is going to be so much optimization that will be built on data. I think for every company, and I think definitely for players like Galileo, understanding how that data is handled responsibly. How do you make it such that we are ultimately giving control back to people rather than data about me going out of my own control. I think that is important. And these are not choices that you can make later. These are choices that you have to make upfront. This is, and this, I think that I'm probably repeating myself when I say that it ultimately comes down to the consumer, like knowing who you're building this for. And I think ultimately anything we do in payments and fintech is about people. And we need to make sure um, we're not losing sight of that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. What do you, so this is a question from Kavita Giandani. She says, or they say, how has risk decisioning evolved on the issuing side?
I think actually that has been one of the interesting areas for me to learn about because traditionally, um, and as an immigrant into the country, right, like I have been at the losing end of credit scores for a long period of time.
Yes, yeah.
And knowing that the systems were stacked up against me for credit scores that would take me a long period of time to get right was a really hard thing to grapple with. And I think that is where risk decisioning and how we evaluate consumers, not only for what they do today, but the potential of what they can bring, is changing. And more and more we see and with Galileo, we have that vantage point where we see a number of fintechs on our platform coming up and trying to rethink in ways in which they can gather more data, alternative insights about consumers to help decide what product is right for them and help get them to that success of getting the financial services product. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, I think for everybody, right? Like if you want to, your access to economic opportunity is always gated on your access to financial service. And it's like a, if I don't have the right financial status, I'm never going to get access to financial services. I'm never going to get access to financial services. I have no means to improve my financial status.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think it really speaks to the opportunity, and what makes what can be really exciting about payments is lowering those barriers, because technology has, sort of reduced or exposed that some of these risks are not real, right? That's, I think, a really exciting sort of front for what is possible sort of in the future. Here's a question specifically about Galileo. How do you distinguish Galileo's product efforts from Sofi's roadmap and vision as you continue to build for external partners?
So I think this is always an interesting one for every company that has been acquired to answer, and I think would be true for Chargehound
Yeah,
in
I'm
short
asking
order
the
as
question,
well.
so
It's,
yeah.
it's always true, right? But ultimately, it comes back to what is the customers that we build for, and what Galileo excels at is being that platform that enables fintech innovation, right? Like that is how we started. That is what we aspire to be, and that means that we have to continue to be a platform that can serve many innovators, many fintechs, many clients, and our roadmap is always going to be balanced across all of those different opportunities. For us, it is not so much about where we sit in the ecosystem, it is more about what are the cool problems that are out there that are worth solving, that we could absorb complexity for and continue building on. And even in the course of the last year since acquisition, Galileo has continued to grow tremendously. Now more than ever, we are heavily focused on that mission for us.
Awesome. And here's another question. What are your thoughts on the balance between the velocity of innovation and who absorbs costs? Merchants, for example, merchants struggling with margin. So I think the question is sort of, yeah, like as payment innovation is really driving things forward, for some merchants are going to suffer if their business model sort of suffers because of that. So how do we balance that? And,
Yeah,
if you are a merchant.
um, I I don't know if merchants can always balance it, right? If you are, it depends upon the scale of the merchant. If you are a merchant that is starting out your business, you're likely going to have to rely on solving um, problems for the segment that you cater to, as opposed to trying and delivering on payment innovation. And that is where merchants will have to rely on partners to be able to get that. And this is what I meant by when I said, like, as a platform company, it is almost like our obligation and responsibility to always set aside time for us to do that innovation for people. Because a good platform has customers of all scales and sizes, right? Like you have small customers, you have established customers, which means that we can actually take, when you think about democratizing your capabilities, you can learn from how your largest customers are using, how they're innovating, and how they're optimizing, and see how you enable those capabilities in your platform to then enable that for the smaller ones who may not have that access and for whom innovation does come at a cost. Because
Yeah.
their bandwidth for innovation is likely better served on their customers as opposed to trying to change fintech and payments.
I think it's a good point that as things innovate and move quickly in a competitive market, if your margin is not cutting it for you, you've either got to change your business model or you've got to keep up. And that's just how things go. And I think the pandemic pretty clearly outlined that. I mean, at least even in the chargeback space, right? Having automation to handle chargebacks versus not, pretty significant margin difference maker. And so we saw that as well. I think, unfortunately, if you're not keeping up now is probably the time to make some pretty major moves.
Yeah, and I think, and even there, right? Like, can a small business go enable touchless payments? Can they do that on their own? Can they, like, if they have to invest soup to nuts on all of it without help, that's hard. So them optimizing for the experience that they render to their customers is probably better off, and then enabling it from another partner is easier.
Yeah, and I think also partially it's right now is an opportunity if you're a small business. Now it's easier than ever to adopt technology that will make a huge difference and will really show a gap between you and everyone that's not doing that. So there's definitely, as long as you're willing to explore it, there's certainly opportunity. So okay, we're right on time. Archie, I want to thank you so much for jumping on the Payment Innovators chat with me. Really a pleasure, and have loved learning from you continuously, but especially on this call with your terrific insight. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
It has been my absolute pleasure, Adrian. And as always, I always enjoy our conversations. Now we get to do it live, so that's been really fun.
Yeah. Cool. And thank you all for attending. Coming up next on June 2nd at 9 a.m. Pacific, I will have Melissa Guzzi, the co-founder and managing partner at Arbor Ventures, one of the best fintech VCs on the planet. So Arbor's, certainly one of the great players right now in what is an amazing time for fintech and particularly for investing. So stay tuned if you're interested in that. Archie, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone else. Have a great day.